RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is he a liberal? Is he a progressive? Is he a socialist? Is he a conservative? Is he a libertarian? Who is this guy? What does he believe? We're going to dive into it on the show today. I'm going to give you all the facts, not opinions. Well, I'll give you some opinions, but not just opinions. I'm going to give you the facts straight from RFK's website, straight from quotes that he said in the past. You're going to get the facts today about RFK Jr. and who he really is. Sneak preview, in case you don't want to watch the whole video. He's not a conservative. He's not a libertarian. The guy is a far left-wing progressive, and I'm going to prove it today on the show. My name is Justin Haskins. Before we get into all of the details on RFK Jr., quick call to action. If you support liberty, if you support free markets, if you support fighting back against Davos, against the Great Reset, then follow me. Please subscribe to the channel. Help out. When you subscribe to the channel, when you like the video, when you leave a comment for the video, all of these things are going to help break through big tech algorithms that hold back content like mine. So please it just takes a moment. It doesn't cost anything at all. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment and like the video and all of that stuff. It's going to help more people see the content. Thank you very much. All right, let's move on really quickly here. Don't have a ton of time to do this video up against a bunch of deadlines, but this is such a huge, important topic because RFK Jr. is, in case you haven't noticed, absolutely killing it in the polls as a third-party candidate. There have been very, very, very few third-party candidates who have done as well as RFK Jr. is doing right now. In fact, you have to go all the way back to the 1990s to find a third-party candidate in Ross Perot, who was a huge factor in that first presidential election with Bill Clinton and George W. Bush's dad. You got to go all the way back to Ross Perot to find a candidate who's been polling as a third-party candidate as well as RFK Jr. is right now. One poll recently from Quinnipiac showed, I think it was of registered voters, showed more than 20%. I think it was 22% of voters said that they supported RFK Jr. in a three-way race with RFK Jr., Donald Trump, who's currently leading all the polls for Republicans in the primaries, and Joe Biden. RFK Jr. got 22%. In a bunch of different states, swing states, he's polling somewhere between 8% and all the way up to 20%. And that comes from polls from the New York Times, for example, and Siena College. There's a whole bunch of different pollsters, Morning Consult, that have done polls about RFK Jr. and show that even in the swing states, he's doing really, really well. So this is a huge issue. And it seems like, it depends on the poll that you look at, but it seems like RFK Jr. is doing better with Republicans and Trump-leaning voters than he's doing with Democrats. And so he's actually impacting the race in a negative way for conservatives more so. He's doing it on the left as well, but more so than he is for President Biden, which surprises a lot of people because the guy, up until very recently, I think it was like October 9th or something like that, somewhere in October, I believe, up until recently, RFK Jr. was a Democrat running for the Democratic Party primary. He just became a third-party candidate. So Republicans, conservatives, libertarians, they're attracted to RFK Jr., but there are really good reasons why they shouldn't be. And that's why I wanted to do this video, because I've known that he's not a conservative for a long time, but I've never taken the time to piece together all the information so that I could present it in a really clear way. So that's what we're going to do. So the first thing that I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about RFK Jr.'s policies and a whole bunch of, I'm going to try to break it down by topic roughly. It's not going to be perfect. And then I'm going to show you his website. I'm going to show you some quotes and stuff. And I think by the end of this video, you're going to agree with me. I don't think there's going to be anybody. I don't care if you love Kennedy, if you hate Kennedy. I don't care if you're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent. I think if you take the time to actually look at this evidence, you're going to agree with me that he's not a conservative. He's not a libertarian. Whatever he isn't that. He's on the left-wing side of the spectrum, to be sure. Now, why does anybody think that he's a conservative? I think we should probably start there. Well, when it comes to his policies on COVID-19 lockdowns, he's completely opposed to those. When it comes to vaccine mandates, he's completely opposed to those related to COVID-19 and other vaccine mandates as well. He's completely opposed to those. When it comes to sort of establishment, the cozying up to the establishment, there's no chance RFK Jr. is being invited to Davos anytime soon, okay? This guy is anti-establishment. He's anti-Davos. And this is why the establishment media and the establishment Democratic Party hates him so much, because he's not in bed with all of those special interests. That's a big part of it anyway. And so I think a lot of people on the right like him because of those reasons. He also has some sort of libertarian leaning policies that some people like. For example, he's in favor of decriminalizing drug possession. As far as I'm aware, I think he's in favor of decriminalizing basically all drug possession. So unless you're committing some sort of violent crime or something like that, I don't think he would be in favor of prosecuting you. Now, for people who are conservative, they don't really support that, but libertarians, there are a lot of libertarians that really like that platform. He's really a strong advocate for scaling back wars and our foreign interventions in other countries and spending lots of money on the military and stuff like that. There are a lot of libertarians that like those policies as well. And so there are things there that conservatives and libertarians like, especially libertarians. But there's a whole bunch of stuff they don't like. All right, so let's get started on that. Let's start with the things that I think prove, or let's get into the things that prove that RFK Jr. is not a conservative or a libertarian. We'll start with climate change, because I think that this is one of the more important issues. So Kennedy is a former environmental lawyer, or he's still actually an environmental lawyer, I guess, an activist. He has a long, long history of working with far left organizations, pushing for sort of radical climate change policies. He used to be kind of a hero on the left for taking some pretty strong stances in the climate change debate. On his presidential website, okay, so we're not talking about stuff that he did in the past. We're talking about right now. It says that Kennedy proposes using the federal government to, quote, incentivize the transition of industry to zero waste cycles and clean energy sources, and forge agreements with other countries to implement these policies throughout the global supply chain. Well, that's basically the Biden administration's policies. Maybe it's even a little bit more radical than that. But it's so vaguely worded here. There are not a lot of details on his website related to this specific thing. So if you're just going to give, I guess, Biden the benefit of the doubt, you could say they're sort of on the same plane. All right. So let's break that down again. Incentivize the transition of industry to zero waste cycles and clean energy sources. So that's basically like Green New Deal light. Okay. We wants wind energy. I think he's a huge fan of wind energy, if I remember right. He wants wind, he wants solar, he wants other renewable energy sources. And he doesn't want fossil fuels. Okay, well, that's a left-wing position. Whatever you think of that, you have to acknowledge that that's a left-wing position. That's not a right-wing position. Okay, the free market position is whatever consumers want is what we should sell. And there should be common sense regulations and stuff like that. But whatever the consumers want is how it should operate, right? So if consumers want solar energy and they want wind energy, then great. Let's have wind energy and solar energy. But that's not what people want. The vast majority of people want affordable energy and reliable energy. And the most affordable, reliable energy we have right now, it comes from fossil fuels. It's natural gas, primarily natural gas. It's coal, things like that. So right from the very start here, just looking at that part of his climate change platform, you can see the guy is clearly not on the conservative end of the spectrum here. It gets crazier though. All right. In addition to transitioning to clean energy sources, which again are more expensive than fossil fuels and are less reliable, okay, because the sun isn't always shining and the wind isn't always blowing, right? He also wants to, quote, protect wildlands from further development. Protect wildlands from further development. That means no more developing land that is currently undeveloped. That's a very radical left-wing environmental position. And then he says, by curbing mining, logging, oil drilling, and suburban sprawl. Okay, so here we have even more anti-fossil fuel positions, but it goes beyond that. He doesn't like logging either, which actually is being used in certain kinds of quote-unquote renewable energy development. And he's also against mining, which is necessary, by the way, if you want to run on wind and solar, because you have to mine things out of the ground to build wind and solar energy sources. Those things require rare earth minerals and other things that you have to mine out of the ground. So I don't even know how this makes sense. But again, he's against oil drilling. And then suburban sprawl was the other thing. This all comes from his website as well, by the way. Suburban sprawl. Well, what is suburban sprawl? That means neighborhoods. That means houses, right? So he doesn't want you building on wild land so that you can have more houses. Well, we need more houses because we increasingly have more people, and the cost of living is already really high for a lot of people. A lot of people, regular people, can't afford houses. So we need more houses. Well, RFK doesn't want more houses, right? He doesn't want you building on land. He doesn't want you building houses on wild lands, right? This, again, is a far left-wing position. Not even the Biden administration is really taking this position. Exactly. I mean, they do have some of this, but not quite to the extent that he's saying here, if we're taking him literally. All right. So these are his positions today. In the past, he's been even more radical than this. He said some really crazy stuff, and I want to get to that. So in order to do that, I'm going to pull up an article that comes from Reason. And this was published several years back, actually about a decade ago now. It's called, you can read it if you're seeing it on the screen right now. But it's called Activist Robert Kennedy Jr. Denies he wants to jail climate change deniers. This is something he was being accused of at the time. And it's true. He does. At least he did at the time want to do that. Actually, he just wants to execute climate villain corporations and think tanks. Okay? So here in the article, you'll see in his article, Jailing Climate Deniers over at EcoWatch. This is something that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. actually wrote, Jailing Climate Deniers. Prominent environmental activist Robert Kennedy Jr. magnanimously allows that individual Americans, even misguided souls who question the scientific consensus on man-made global warming, have a First Amendment right to speak their piece. Corporations and think tanks, however, are another matter. Kennedy argues that such organizations do not enjoy free speech protections and therefore can and should be targeted for death by activist state attorney generals. And he goes on, this is a block quote from that article, but essentially what it says is that they should receive the death penalty, meaning the corporations should receive the death penalty. Their charters should be revoked. That's what that means. Their charters should be revoked. They should be destroyed, and you shouldn't be allowed to do this. And I've seen him do video interviews where he talks about this as well. And essentially what he argues is that this is really no different than when tobacco companies were funding lies about tobacco for, there were certain think tanks that were dedicated entirely toward that topic. And Big Tobacco was giving them money to basically tell people lies about the harms or lack of harm of tobacco. And he compares this to think tanks and other policy organizations that are saying, I don't think that global warming is a crisis. And he's saying that's the same thing, because the evidence is so clear on this that you should be shut down. You shouldn't be allowed to say this. This is an incredibly radical position. Again, the Biden administration isn't taking this position. This is him saying this. And then he goes on in the article, Reason points out that RFK said, among the groups that have received millions from Exxon and Koch Industries, these are some of the groups that he thinks should potentially be shut down, are the Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation, Those are two of the largest think tanks, by the way, on the right. Cooler Heads Coalition, Global Climate Coalition, American Legislative Exchange Council. That's basically the largest organization of conservative lawmakers, state lawmakers on the right. Americans for Prosperity, the Heartland Institute, where I work, by the way, Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, CFACT, George C. Marshall Institute, State Policy Network, that's a network of conservative think tanks, Competitive Enterprise Institute, and the American Enterprise Institute, another one of the largest right-leaning think tanks in America. So think about that for a minute. He's suggesting they should shut down. They should all shut down. Again, so is this a libertarian approach? No, it's not. It absolutely is not. Okay, so this is just climate change. All right, this is just climate change. There's a whole climate change and environmentalism and things like that. There's a whole bunch of other things that I could bring up just related to that one topic. But I'm not going to do that, because we could spend the entire episode just talking about climate change. And there's a whole lot more stuff we can look at. We don't have to just pick one topic. So let's move to something else. Let's start with, let's do some economic policy. Let's do some economic policy. I think that's a good place to go. We'll pull up Kennedy's website here so you can see for yourself. He has a section on his website called Cost of Living. And in this section of the website, Cost of Living, he lays out some of his platform. And here's what he says. He says one of the things he wants to do is raise the minimum wage to $15. He's talking about a federal minimum wage, which is equivalent to its 1967 level. He's talking about if you factor in inflation and stuff like that. All right, $15 minimum wage. That is literally the thing that socialist Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, people like that have been calling for a long time, a federal minimum wage of $15. All right. That is not a conservative position. If you raise the minimum wage, it's been proven to limit hours and or jobs for lower income people. And it hurts smaller businesses more than it hurts anybody else. He also wants to prosecute union-busting corporations so that labor can organize and negotiate fair wages. So in other words, he wants the government to get involved in disputes between labor unions and their employers. We're not talking about public sector labor unions. We're talking about corporations. He's talking about private sector labor unions. Again, that's a left-wing position. He wants to expand free childcare to millions of families with programs like that pioneered by the state of New Mexico. So he wants free government-provided childcare programs. He wants to, that's number 3. Number 4, drop housing costs by $1,000 per family and make home ownership affordable by backing 3% home mortgages with tax-free bonds. That's a really, really interesting one. Essentially, what he's suggesting there is, and I've seen him talk about this elsewhere, so I have a little bit more context for that. He wants to create a federal government program that would cap mortgages for millions of families at 3%. They're currently much, much higher than that. I want to say they're in the 8s right now. Okay, so he wants to cap it at 3%. But he's not just talking about price fixing, because you'd say, okay, well, you're saying that he's going to make some law that says that it can't go above 3%. My understanding is no. What he wants to do is have the government subsidize. He wants the government to subsidize the difference between whatever the mortgage interest rate is and the 3% number. So if mortgage rates are 8%, he wants that 5 percentage points difference between the 8% and his 3% cap to be covered by this government program. So it's a massive, I have no idea how much that would cost, but my guess is it would be billions and billions, possibly hundreds of billions of dollars. We're talking about a massive amount of money. Okay. Massive amount of money. So again, does any of this sound to you like something that would be considered a conservative policy position? $15 federal minimum wage, getting involved, helping unions fight private businesses, a free child care program, so another social safety net type program, getting involved in the housing industry, subsidizing the housing industry, which and just on the 3% mortgage thing, it is such a ludicrous policy, and here's why. I totally agree that housing is completely unaffordable. I completely agree with that. But if you say, okay, we're going to cover the cost of a mortgage beyond 3%, okay, of an interest rate, we're going to cover the rest of the interest part of the mortgage, then the prices of houses are going to skyrocket because people selling it know that people can afford to spend more, because before they were paying 8% mortgages and now they only have to pay 3%. So the prices of homes is going to skyrocket. They're already, near historic highs right now. Okay. And the only reason they're not at historic highs right now is because the Biden administration has done such a terrible job with the economy that mortgage prices have started to collapse after they were skyrocketing from all the COVID money that had been pumped into the economy and all the stimulus money that the Biden administration was spending and artificially keeping interest rates super low when they should have been higher all along, spending trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that we didn't have. All of those terrible policies of the Democrats have increased housing costs. And now Kennedy wants to come in and create another government program that's only going to raise housing prices even higher. This is insane. And how are we going to pay for all this? I'll tell you how we're going to pay for all of this, because Kennedy has a plan for that. The main way that he wants to pay for many of these programs is by cutting military spending. He says this on his website. People always ask, how are you going to pay for all this? Good question. The answer is simple. First is to end the military adventures and regime change wars like the one in Ukraine. The wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Libya already cost over $8 trillion. That's $90,000 per family of four. That's enough to pay off all medical debt, all credit card debt, provide free childcare, feed every hungry child, repair our infrastructure. He also wants to spend a lot of money on an infrastructure program. I forgot that. And make college tuition free with money left over. Does any of this sound to you like a conservative position? That's enough to make Social Security solvent for another 30 years. And he goes on and on and on. All right. Now, what's wrong with that? Look, I don't like the military adventures and regime change wars either. But here's the problem with taking the position of saying, well, look at all the money we've spent in Iraq and Afghanistan and all this stuff, Ukraine. Some of those were necessary, by the way, like the war in Afghanistan was necessary. We did have to do that. But putting all that aside, I mean, let's just say all of those wars were completely unnecessary. We should have been spending the money on all of these other programs. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is we don't have any money for any of it. That's the problem. We are running trillion plus dollar deficits every year now. Sometimes $2 or $3 trillion deficits, sometimes more on COVID times, right? We don't have any of this money. So the idea of, well, you know what we'll do? We'll gut the military in the midst of one of the most tumultuous periods in global affairs since the fall of the Soviet Union. We've got wars in Europe, which almost never happens in modern times. We've got wars in Europe. We've got Israel being attacked, one of the largest attacks on Israel since the Holocaust. We've got massive, massive problems. China's threatening to invade Taiwan. Japan might get drawn into some kind of a conflict, and they don't even really have a military. We have all of these massive problems going on all over the world. Russia's even threatening to use nuclear weapons at various periods of time. They've threatened that, right? This war in Europe could expand dramatically. And he wants to gut the military? I mean, I don't know if that's the right call. I don't know if that's the right call. That doesn't seem to be a great... And then gut the military and turn around and not save the money and balance the budget and secure the dollar. No. Have more social programs. Invest in more gigantic infrastructure programs, which we've been hearing about forever from Washington. They always want a new infrastructure program. How is it that they've spent all this money and they haven't fixed roads and bridges yet? Barack Obama was saying that 10 years ago? I mean, how many times do we have to hear this promise, right? The fact of the matter is there's no money for any of it. There's no money for any of it. So there's nothing responsible about this. And the national debt isn't even brought up in any of this. Okay. There's other things that we need to bring up as well. He promises to break up too big to fail banks and monopolies. So he wants to break up large corporations. And when crises strike, bail out the homeowners, debtors, and small business owners instead. Well, that's a nice populist position, but I'm not sure that I support bailouts at all. I think we just need to fix the problem so the bailout isn't necessary in the first place, not promise to bail people out so that they make terrible decisions. Again, is that a conservative position? No, of course it's not a conservative position. I mean, none of this is a position that a conservative or libertarian would support. None of it. Let's talk about healthcare policy. All right. Kennedy has said that it seems, based on the interview that I've seen from Kennedy, that he doesn't support single-payer healthcare, but instead he supports a single-payer healthcare system for all who wants it, a sort of public option. This was a big part of the debate for the Democrats in the 2020 primary season, because Bernie Sanders and people like that wanted Medicare for all. That forces basically everybody into a single-payer government-run healthcare system. And then other Democrats wanted a system that allowed for private health insurance to still exist, but then created this Medicare-like system run by the government that people could choose to go into if they wanted to. And that seems to be Kennedy's position. Again, this is a left-wing position. This is a left-wing position. This is not a right-wing position. We don't support having a massive new government program that would cost hundreds of billions of dollars every single year or more. Like, we don't support that. And the problem with it is it's really easy to say, well, why not have a Medicare for all type or a Medicare option, a public option? Why not have that? And the reason for that is because, I mean, there are many reasons, but the biggest reason for it is if you believe that the government is incapable of running healthcare and you don't want the government taking over the healthcare system, and I do believe that, then the last thing you want to do is create a public option. Because if you had a public option that allowed anybody who wants it to opt into this government healthcare plan, which would have lower premiums and would be more affordable, right? That would be the whole selling point of it. Maybe the quality of it wouldn't be as good, but it would be more affordable. Then what's going to occur is the healthy people are going to go into the public option because they're not using their health insurance. So they don't care if it's a high quality health insurance plan. It doesn't matter as much to them. Some of them will be concerned about that, but a lot of people won't. They'll just say, well, I'm a healthy person. I don't really have a lot of health problems, so I'll go into the public option because that's cheaper. And if I get sick, then I can always go back into the private sector if I really need to, or I'll just stay in the public option. And it's like, okay, but the more the healthy people leave the private market, the more expensive it becomes for the health insurers to continue offering insurance. Because the whole basis of insurance is there are more people paying in who are not using the service than there are people who need the service, right? So there have to be the ratio of healthy people to sick people has to be really, there has to be a lot more healthy people than sick people. The more you add, the more you change it so that the ratio is the sick people, the people who are with really high cost ailments become a greater proportion of the pool, the insurance, the people who are insured, the more expensive it becomes for the insurance company. And they are going to raise rates and they're going to increase deductibles and they're going to do other things. And eventually it's just going to drive them out of business because the healthy people are all going to go into the public option because it's cheaper and they're not using their insurance anyway. The sicker people are going to stay with the good health insurance, but that's going to keep driving up the costs. And you're going to end up with a disaster. You're going to end up with the public option is going to turn very quickly into Medicare for all. Because eventually the insurance companies are all just going to shut down. And we saw this with Obamacare when they started putting all these rules and regulations in place and mandates, and they created this system where, you know, you could just join, you could just buy health insurance even after you have cancer and all this stuff, which is not really health insurance at all. And the cost of insurance went up, and whatever you think of that policy, the point is, when Democrats have done this in the past, the cost of health insurance skyrocketed. And this would be no different than that, except now there's a public option for everybody to go into, and eventually the health insurance companies are just going to shut down. There's not going to be any of them left. The only people who have health insurance will be the richest people, the people who can afford to pay outrageous rates, but they're willing to do it because it's a better quality plan. Everyone else is going to be stuck with some kind of inferior government-run plan, which is exactly what Medicaid is. And I think that that's ultimately what you would end up with. So it would be a disaster. It would be a catastrophe. It would be absolutely terrible. The healthcare industry would be hurt by this because Medicare doesn't pay out as much. Like the reimbursement rates for Medicare is really, really bad. Healthcare providers often lose money on Medicare patients, or they break even. Medicaid patients is even worse. They're losing money on these people, and they make up for it with the health insurance companies by getting more money from them. But of course, the more people are going into the Medicare system, the more people using the public option, the more that drives up the cost for the healthcare providers, the more they're going to charge the insurance companies, the more the insurance companies are going to end up in this death spiral, and they're not going to be able to survive it. So that's a catastrophic plan. That's a catastrophic plan. And that's what Kennedy wants. It's a liberal, progressive, left-wing plan. There's more. Let's talk about Kennedy's position on abortion. There are libertarians that are pro-abortion. So maybe you could argue, well, if he's pro-abortion, then that's a libertarian position. The problem with that is Kennedy has taken both a sort of pro-life-ish position and a radical pro-abortion position. He's taken both positions. And in fact, he did it within basically 24 hours. He flip-flopped. This is an incredible story. He was at a campaign event in August, and an NBC reporter, I think it was an NBC reporter, asked him a question about a 15-week abortion ban, federal abortion ban. That's not a position Democrats would normally take. Kennedy responded to that and said, yeah, he supported the 15-week abortion ban. And then he went on to explain his logic behind supporting the ban, which was that if an unborn child is viable outside the womb, the state has an interest in protecting that unborn child. That's not a direct quote, but that's basically what he said. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. Now, I don't know how you can answer the question that way unless you really mean that. I don't know how else you could, I don't know how you could misunderstand that, but that's exactly what they claimed. Within 24 hours, of course, they received tons of backlash from the left who, don't like that position on abortion. And soon thereafter, the Kennedy campaign, and by soon thereafter, I mean with the same day, basically, the Kennedy campaign came out and said this: Mr. Kennedy's position on abortion is that it is always the woman's right to choose. He does not support legislation banning abortion. They went on to say, or actually before that part of the statement, they said that Kennedy misunderstood the question, which doesn't make any sense because he clearly didn't. If you see the transcript, you would know. There's no way that he misunderstood the question. He flip-flopped. So first he was for a 15-week abortion ban. Now he's not for any bans at all. He's for abortion all the way up until birth, I guess. I don't know. That seems to be what he's saying. So it doesn't even matter what your position on abortion is. You can't trust Kennedy's position on abortion, right? And at the very least, you have to argue, even if you're super pro-abortion, most conservatives are not for abortion all the way up to the time of birth, right? We can agree on that. Most conservatives do not support that. I think most libertarians don't support that. Even the pro-abortion ones, a lot of them, I don't think they want abortion all the way up to the time of birth, but that seems to be what Kennedy is suggesting. Again, he does not support legislation banning abortion. That is a direct quote. It is always a woman's right to choose. Always. What does that mean? Look, all of these things, and there's a whole bunch of other things that I could point to, all right? indicate very clearly that RFK Jr., you may like him for a lot of his policy positions. If you're a conservative or a libertarian, you may think he's a good guy in a lot of different things. But there's no doubt whatsoever he's not a conservative. He's not a libertarian. If he were a Republican, he would be the most liberal Republican that I can think of. He's not. He's not a conservative. He's not a libertarian. He's obviously a progressive. He's not a socialist either, but he's clearly a progressive. Now, in case there's any of you out there who are holdouts and you're saying, well, you know, I don't know. You pointed out a lot of things, but there are other things you could look at, and he's a little more conservative on those things. Okay, fine. There's other things I could have pointed to that shows that he's even more progressive than I pointed out. Like he wants more regulations on businesses, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff, right? Increased government spending and stuff. But, well, I shouldn't say increased government spending. He wants to gut the military to pay for everything. So I guess it's not really total increased government spending, but he's not in favor of balancing the budget as far as I can tell. But let's just hear what Kennedy has to say for himself. This is a direct quote. This is a direct quote from Kennedy. Okay? I'm going to read it to you. He said, this was at a C-SPAN. He was on C-SPAN, and this is one of these things where people can call into C-SPAN and ask questions. This is what he said. If you go down the checklist of all the things that my father believed in, Robert Kennedy, of course, was a famous Democrat, right? Brother of John Kennedy, JFK. And my uncle John Kennedy believed in, I would check every one of those boxes. They, you know, were classic, progressive, liberal Democratic candidates. And as I've pointed out, I think that's pretty clear here. I mean, I don't think that JFK was like a Bernie Sanders. I don't think he was even like a Joe Biden type, modern Joe Biden. Joe Biden's become a lot more progressive since he's become president. But do I think that he's a conservative? No, he calls himself a progressive. He calls himself a classic progressive, a classic liberal. Those are his words. Why aren't we paying attention? All you have to do is go to his campaign website, read through it. Yes, there's stuff on there that is, you know, stuff that libertarians especially will like and some conservatives will like, no doubt about it. But there's a ton of stuff on there that is obviously progressive and liberal crap. So on the question of whether RFK Jr. is a conservative or libertarian, the answer is obvious. No chance. Not even remotely close. RFK Jr. is a progressive. He is a liberal. He is not a socialist, and he is not an extreme progressive, like the kind that you might find at Davos that want to, you know, micromanage every part of your life. I don't think he's like that. But he is clearly a progressive. He is clearly a liberal, and he is clearly not on the side of pro-liberty, free market conservatism or libertarianism. That just isn't the case. Whatever you might think of him on other issues like vaccine mandates and COVID lockdowns and wars and military spending, whatever. Maybe there are some of you out there that think those things are right, but his policies are right on those things. But at the end of the day, you have to acknowledge he's not a conservative. He's not a libertarian. All right. That's all we got for today's show. I think this is an open and shut case. I don't think there's any doubt about it whatsoever. I think we've proven it. So I feel pretty good about this one. I feel pretty good about it. Thank you for tuning in. If you're interested in learning more about me and my work, you can go to justinhaskins.com. You can go to heartland.org to see the website of the Heartland Institute. And again, call to action. Please subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed already, like the video, leave a comment. All of that stuff is going to help more people see it. Until next time, thank you for tuning in. My name is Justin Haskins. Stay free.